So my name is Rebecca O'Connor. I'm the Director of Development for Rivers and Lands Conservancy. And we are a nonprofit land trust based out of Riverside, California, but we conserve lands all across Southern California. We've been around for 30 years, and in those 30 years, we have been a partner in conserving over 14,500 acres of land. We currently hold a little over 2,600, and we have 60 properties. We add new properties every year. And in addition to conserving and stewarding the lands that we hold and looking for new opportunities for conservation, we also do a lot of education during the year for youth, and a lot of volunteer events and bring folks out onto our properties and other properties to connect with nature and help steward the nature that we have around us. And unfortunately, this year has been a little bit of a struggle for that, but we're hoping things are going to loosen up and we're going to get folks out a little bit more. But for now, we are doing things like this and hoping to encourage you to get out into nature on your own and connect with us in a virtual ways. So these happy hours, we've been doing them for a few months now, and we have a really great sponsor, Wix. Unfortunately, a lot of you are not in Riverside, but if you are, there is a discount on getting Wix brews delivered or pick them up to go. And it's 25% off, and they have incredible beer. It's great for happy hour. So if you're local, be sure to check them out and support them. All the local businesses, just like the nonprofits, are having to find new ways to make a go of it. So, so I'll roll into making plant prints. Rachel here is with Rivers and Lands Conservancy. She is our outreach coordinator. Did somebody get that right for once, Rach?
You got it right.
Rachel is responsible for a lot of our activities with volunteers and some of our educational programs. And we also have with us Shelley Swanland, who's my mother, so please forgive me. I'm going to continue to call her mom because calling her Shelley is just weird. And ignore that she calls me Becky. My name's Rebecca. She's the only one that's allowed to say that. And my mom started with plant prints last summer. Was it August?
A year and a half ago.
So
4th of July.
On the weekend of the 4th of July. She thought she'd give it a try. Her prints were so cool, I wanted to try it. So I talked her into doing a Saturday arts and crafts mother-daughter thing, and I learned how to make plant prints. So we've both been making these since last summer. We both have sort of veered off into doing different things. So I asked my mom to join us because she'll be able to share some insights on some of the techniques that she uses that are different from the ones that I do. So plant prints, a lot of people know of them as eco prints. We decided we don't particularly like the name eco prints because we're not really sure what that's supposed to mean. They're not necessarily ecologically great for the environment. We use vinegar and we use mordants. So we call them plant prints, or we call them phyto impressions. Did our homework, found out that the first person to come close to making these did it back in the 1840s, a man named Herschel. He made botany prints using a technique very similar to daguerreotypes and tintypes, only using plant materials, and that's carried forward into now. And it's a really simple process that has a lot of variations and ways to do it. So we're just going to give you a broad brushstroke of what we do, but you'll find that there are a lot of, there's a lot on the internet that you can dig into. And if you feel like going down that rabbit hole, you'll be down there for a long time. So, so basically, like I said, all it takes to do plant prints is leaves, vinegar, a form of mordant, and paper. The type of paper that you use does matter. Different papers have the process turn out differently. I tend to use cardstock and lightweight mixed media. They both print very well, but one's a little thicker and a little easier to deal with. But I like to do art on my prints, so the mixed media works best for me when I'm using colored pencils on it. But my mom has used all kinds of papers, and I'm going to let her talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I like a heavier weight mixed media than Rebecca. I used the Canson with the blue cover mostly, but besides that, I've used antique and vintage book pages in my prints. I've used parchment paper, postcards, and tags, and file folders are really take a nice print. So file folders at estate sales, really a nice pickup and good paper.
So the other part that, the other component that you need is the mordant. And there's a lot of different mordants. Primarily, I use iron, just with pieces of iron that have rusted a little bit, and mix in with the vinegar in the bath when you cook the leaves, and we'll get into that whole process. Also, earlier this year, Rachel and I did a program with Boys and Girls Club locally, or sorry, Big Brothers, Big Sisters locally in the Inland Empire, and did it virtually and put together kits for them and figured out how we might put together a kit that the bigs and the littles could take home and work with. So there's these really great pots on Amazon, and you'll see Rachel gave you a link where you can both find the papers that we've talked about and that pot. But so these little aluminum pots, the aluminum itself is a mordant too. It reacts with the vinegar and works with the plants. I could explain exactly what a mordant is to you, but that would require me to be a chemist. My mom and I joke that plant prints are alchemy, and we're not really sure exactly how the magic happens, but aluminum or iron. And my mom will talk a little bit about how iron works differently and some other aspects of the mordant.
Can either one of you answer the question on whether or not watercolor paper works well?
I'm sorry I didn't mention watercolor paper. Watercolor paper is heavy, and it will do to the prints exactly what watercolor does to the other kinds of paintings. It'll make it washed out more. It will give it that watercolor look, so you don't get the fine detail on watercolor paper.
Thank you.
So, Mom, can you talk a little bit about some of the other papers that you've used?
Not the papers, already did that. The mordant?
Oh, sorry, the mordant. We were on mordant. Sorry. It's been a long day.
The iron and the vinegar gives you more black in your prints. The aluminum also helps the colors. The vinegar sets the dyes in the paper as it would in fabric. And you can make mordant and add it by putting a piece of some iron in a jar with half water and half vinegar, and putting a lid on it but not tight, and just letting it sit to the side all the time. And then you can just put, Becky and I call it a glug. I mean, Rebecca and I call it a glug. We put a glug into a bath sometimes to give it that little extra black. And you could do it with and without the aluminum as well.
And you can also use alum, I understand, but I gave Mom some alum and she didn't like it. So we'll have to start, that was a year ago though, so we'll have to circle back at some point, but.
Alum is aluminum.
It is, but the powdered form. So the other thing that is important is the pot that you use. I mentioned the aluminum pot. You can use stainless steel pots. You probably don't want to use anything that has a coating on the inside, but whatever pot that you do use, you probably want to designate that for plant prints. Almost everything recommends that you don't cook with the pot that you make prints in. So if you can, go to the dollar store and find a pot. I know Mom finds pots at estate sales, or you could get them at garage sales, or if you have an old one in the back of your cupboard that you can relegate. It just needs to be big enough for the papers that you're going to use. And we'll explain how we set the papers up so you have some idea of what that's like. So we, to give you an example, I know a lot of you have already seen the video, but really quickly, here's some of the prints that you could potentially make. And actually all of these are my mom's prints. It was easier for me to steal photos from her than to scan my own. So So part of this presentation is me prepping for a gala we have in less than 2 weeks. So I'm going to ask my colleagues, could you hear that okay? Could you hear the music?
I could hear it, but I couldn't see it.
I could hear it, but I couldn't see it.
Yeah, nobody saw it.
Huh, okay.
Thanks for being our guinea pigs, everybody. We've done multiple Zoom meetings, but this is our first time using the Zoom webinar format. Thanks. Thanks for your patience.
Because apparently I wasn't sharing my screen.
There you go.
There you go.
That was why that was why I could not find my screen share bar. It was because I wasn't sharing it.
One more time.
So one more time for posterity. Let's try this again. Okay, so that's some of the possibilities of what you can do. So here's where you get started. The first step, of course, is gathering your leaves. And there are a lot of leaves that work really well, and there are some that don't work particularly well. You want to find leaves that don't have a waxy coating, that lay nicely flat. Eucalyptus is always a great leaf to use. The varieties of maple and liquid amber. Things like ivy don't work well. A lot of this is experimenting and going out and finding different leaves. They'll all cast slightly different colors depending on the dyes that are in the leaves. And for example, plum and sand cherry, certain times of the year, tends to throw some blue. Some leaves, like catalpa, throw green, right, Mom? Can you talk a little bit about so my mother lives in Riverside proper, and I live which is chaparral-ish, and I live more desert transitional, and we both have different kinds of leaves, and we also have different leaves that are growing on the trees within the city that people have planted. So talk a little bit about some of the leaves you use, Mom.
I use a lot of maple. There's a lot of maple leaves in Riverside, but eucalyptus, we didn't say this, but eucalyptus has a lot of tannin, and Rebecca and I tend to put eucalyptus in almost every batch because it adds tannin and helps the prints as well. Some other good leaves to use are dogwood, smoke, like she said, liquid amber. What else? I know the catalpa is a really large leaf that makes a good, you lay it on your stack like a piece of paper, and it gives it a green background, and it adds a lot of green to the whole batch.
So when you go out and collect your leaves, for a batch, you're probably wanting about a gallon-sized Ziploc bag of leaves is usually sufficient for a batch. Gather different leaves that, the variety, or I guess if you want to do all eucalyptus, you'll get a nice, really dark batch. But my mom tends to be careful about not pulling leaves off of neighbors' trees and collecting them when they've fallen or when they're on public property. So you want to be mindful of that and of any leaves that you might pick on, native landscapes as well, and being gentle with the plants. And so like I said, depending on the season, you're going to find different leaves, you're going to get different colors. And so this is something that you can do all year round. So once you've collected your leaves, you're going to soak them in vinegar and water. And you're doing about a 50-50 soak of water and vinegar in a shallow dish and laying out all the leaves. So Rachel was kind enough to shoot some little videos for me. So she's going to be our Vanna for this presentation. And here's what it looks like when you're laying out your leaves.
All right, so we have picked our leaves from around our neighborhood, and we've clipped off the ones that we want to use for our plant prints. It is now in our shallow Tupperware dish. And I have our vinegar here. Poured 2 cups. 2 cups of the vinegar go into our dish. And now I'm going to add some additional water so that the leaves are completely submerged. And might need to give them a little press down. If they float to the top, that's okay. Just a smidge more. And then they sit for 1 hour.
So that's the simple soak, and you can soak them for an hour is great. I think both my mom and I have fudged and gone as little as 20 minutes soaking them. But if you have dry leaves that you're using, you might want to soak them a little longer. Do you think, Mom?
Yeah, in warmer water.
Okay.
You might want to start your dry leaves first and give them some warm water so they poof up a little bit.
So then your next step after your leaves are done soaking is to lay them out on your papers. And so whatever design you want, however you want to lay them out, if you just want to lay out a couple and see what you get, you're going to have lighter prints and not as much, it won't be as busy and interesting. So oftentimes the more leaves you lay down, the better. When you look at your leaves, every leaf has an earth side and a sun side. For whatever reason, the earth side, the side of the leaf that points toward the ground, tends to leave a much stronger print than the sun side. You'll get much more detail, and the other side tends to be fuzzier. So if you lay down all of your leaves on one side or the other, you'll get a strong print on one side and a light print on the other. Do you have anything to add to laying out things, Mom, that you can think of that's helpful?
No, that was pretty good.
Thanks, Mom. So Rachel's going to show you laying out these.
All right, so our leaves have been soaking for an hour, and now it's time to start laying them out on our paper. So it works well to take the leaves so that they are all facing the same way. So in this case, I'm going to take the earth facing side and press it down onto the paper.
Oh, sorry.
And you can just begin to arrange them artfully, whatever calls to you. I might might trim a couple here along the way. If you have any leaves with extra long stems, you'll want to trim those guys as well.
So Rachel's going to speed lay these out real quick.
Look at me go.
You're fast.
Yeah.
I wish I laid my leaves out that fast.
Well, you know, practice. Practice makes perfect.
And then once you have your first layer, you'll take your piece of paper and place it on top. And then we'll repeat that process.
So don't worry too much about how much water there is. The more water, the better. It'll make your paper more pliable as you're laying things down, especially if you're going to use my way of bundling them, which we'll show you in a second. But like Rachel's doing here, you know, whatever design suits your fancy, and just keep stacking until you're done. So the next step is bundling these to prepare them to go into the pot to simmer. And so I explained the pots, but you're going to want to set up a pot with water. I usually put just like maybe a quarter cup of vinegar. My mom likes to take the bath water that the leaves have been in, or the soap water that the leaves have been in, and pour those in. You'll have that water with your mordant, whether that's some rusty nails that you've thrown in, or we have these iron brackets that we throw in, or if you're using an aluminum pan, you just want to add enough vinegar. So like I said, like a cup of vinegar to react with the aluminum. So the vinegar creates mordant, but it also brings out the dye. So which is why you kind of need vinegar in both, for both aspects, both the soak and the mordant. Did I just say that wrong, Mom, or did I get that right?
I think you said it right.
Okay. We have a hard time remembering. Again, I failed chemistry in college. So Rachel's going to show you my bundling technique, which when we gave the kits to the kids, we used little pieces of PVC and rolled our papers in. You can also do that with aluminum can. You can also stack them between pieces of cardboard. So this is the technique with rolling them up before you drop them in the water.
All right, so I've got all my leaves in my paper here, stacked on top of each other. I've trimmed off any of the little edges that were sticking out, any of the little leaves. And now I'm going to take my PVC pipe, make sure these papers are nice and aligned to start. And I'm going to place it at one end. And keeping the paper as tight together and as flat together as possible, I'm going to start rolling this.
One of the tricks to this is putting a little bit of water on top of your paper to get it damp before you roll it. That makes it a little bit easier.
And when I get to the end, I'm going to take our rubber bands. Very carefully wrapping 2 around. Being mindful of the paper here. Like so.
And like I said, you can use a beer can to do that, or a, pardon me, Mom, a Coke can. Or any other round item that will be fine floating in the pot. You might want to put a couple extra pieces of blank paper on the outside. The rubber band does leave an indentation. And the whole point of getting these fairly tight is you want some water to get in to help the plant prints and spread the color, to help the leaves print on the paper and spread the color. But if you get too much water in there, it all just washes away. So you want it to be nice and tight. And so the other way is to stack paper in between pieces of cardboard and rubber band them. And Mom, can you talk a little bit about that?
There's a picture. Yeah, I start out with a piece of cardboard and then usually a couple of the file folders cut to the same size. and then paper, leaves, paper, leaves, paper, leaves. And you can make as big a stack as will fit in your pan. So, and then cardboard on the top and then a bunch of rubber bands, just like Rachel used.
So if you have a really big pot you're doing these in, the flat way is best. I know mom has like a roaster, don't you?
I have 3 pans. I have a pan about the size of the ones they got on, they could get on Amazon. Then I have a canning pot, which takes like 6 by 9 pieces. And then I have a roaster pan that takes 9 by 12 sheets. And that, I think that's the middle size right there. So yeah, it's at a lot of latitude.
So you're gonna drop those in your pan with your water and your mordant, your vinegar, and boil them for about an hour. You want to bring them to a boil and then turn them down to a simmer and let them sit. So just keep an eye on them once they get to boiling. If they boil the whole time, you might have some paper damage. So it's best to keep it down to a simmer. And then once those are done boiling, you're going to let it cool a little bit. In our canning pots, we have a rack. So we pull it out and let it cool before we use mitts and pull it out. With my smaller pots and the PVC, I just use a pair of tongs and pull it out. And you set it in the sink, let the water drain from it, let it cool, and then you're going to unveil them. So when you unveil your prints, you want to be super careful with the paper. It holds up really well, but it is really easy to rip these as you pull them apart. And the larger the pieces are, the easier they are to rip. And there's nothing worse than having a print that is perfect and you love and then ripping it, except that we can cut them up and use them for smaller things. But I usually want mine in a big sheet that I can draw on, and that's a real bummer. So Rachel's going to show you the process of unveiling these, which is the best part of doing plant prints. It's like Christmas because, like we said, it's alchemy and you never quite know what you're going to get. She's going to unroll them, and you'll notice she uses the water at the sink a little bit. So Rachel's being really brave. I normally snip my rubber bands because I worry about when I pull them off, but she's got better dexterity than me, so she has no problems there. Also, through this whole process, I recommend, if you have sensitive skin, that you use gloves. It's not too terribly harsh on your hands, but it's not a bad idea at all to wear gloves, especially if you're doing this a lot. So you're just going to gently unroll these papers and start peeling them apart carefully and pulling off the leaves. It's really helpful if you have a trash can nearby, or you can set the leaves in the sink. And then you see what you have unveiled. So some of the leaves may be really thin and stick to the paper. And this is especially true of plum leaves, and which is why I think Rachel's turning on the water now. So it helps to run just a really light drizzle of water over these as you pull them off. If they're sticking, they'll peel right off. And if you want to use and that's true with the little tiny leaves too, they get really difficult to come off, but the water will just take it right off for you. And if you have anything that sticks, just very gently take your fingers and run it across the paper. I generally tend to rinse all of my papers. I found little bits of detritus on them later, so it doesn't hurt just to keep that water running and rinse off all your prints. But that's a great one, Rach.
Yeah, that one had the plum leaves.
Yeah.
It's cool.
So once you've got these papers out, your next step is to dry them. So while you're rinsing them, before you start rinsing them, actually, you want to lay some towels out on your kitchen counter. Don't use anything that you want to stay nice and white, because the mordant does leave some stains on them. But use some old dish towels or bar rags, lay them on the countertop, roll some paper towels across those, and set your prints down to get most of the excess water off of them. Then you can also take a paper towel and dab the tops of them to get more of the excess water and move them over to some place to sit and dry. My mom has a table in her house that she lays all of her prints out. I have one out on my porch where it's in the summertime, they dry really quickly. But once they're dry, you can stack them under a bunch of books to flatten them out. Or if you're feeling really courageous and want your prints super flat because you're drawing on them like I am, you can get out your iron and on a fairly low setting, very quickly run the iron across. Don't ever let the iron sit still. And I'll tell you what my mom didn't teach me, because even though she's a seamstress, she's an amazing textile designer. She's never taught me how to iron. You want to get the edges so they're nice and flat. Did I miss anything, Mom, about?
No, and the other thing that I do is I actually bake mine in my oven to dry them. That's an option too. You can lay them in on a cookie sheet in your oven and dry them at the lowest setting your oven will go, which is usually about 170 degrees. So that's an option as well.
So if you're in a big rush for them to get dried out to use them for a project, or you're going to get yelled at because they're taking up a lot of space, you can warm them up in the oven and get them to dry more quickly. So once you have your plants, once you have your prints, there are so many possibilities for what you can do with them. Like I said, I like to draw on mine, so I tend to lay mine out so there's a white space in the middle of them, and I can draw mostly birds on them. And my mom has, and so the also thing you can do with all of your excess paper, it's really simple to make little books and to stack these papers up. This is what we did with the Big Brothers Big Sisters. We gave them a kit with with a piece of cardstock for a cover and mixed media for the inside, so they were able to fold those all together and do a quick stitch with some waxed thread to tie the books together. And I have primarily done plant prints with drawing on them in mind, but my mom has done a gazillion different things with them, so she's going to talk about that.
Well, this one is a book that is made, that I used antique paper from the middle 1800s, ledger paper, and did plant prints on them, and they were that yellow color to begin with, so they really a lot of fiber in that paper. These are the file folder journals that the covers, and so they have. I use a lot of the iron mordant, and that's why you see so much dark in mine.
Right. So with the prints that you saw in the video that Rachel did, that was aluminum and vinegar. So those prints will come out much lighter than with the iron mordant.
Yeah. But you have to be careful because you can use too much iron mordant. These business cards that I made are digitally enhanced, so you don't usually get this bright of colors. But if you take the plant prints into Photoshop and boost the color, these are the kind of colors that you get, because the colors are actually in the paper, in the print, but there's a lot more gray, so it's not as obvious.
So if you just isolate the colors in Photoshop and boost them, you get some really lovely colors. I found that they work really great for marketing materials and backgrounds to websites, and there's a lot of things that you can do with these digitally.
Yes, absolutely.
And the tags?
Tags. Tags, just tags that you get at the Staples or the Office Smart. You just lay multiple tags on top of a sheet of paper, and that's how you get that's what you get on them. They're very effective.
So when you're making your stack of plant prints with the papers, you can mix up the sizes of papers and the types of papers in there to get these various designs. You can also use your larger papers to cut them down, but you get some really interesting texture when you vary the paper sizes.
And Sherry just asked if you can use paper that already has design on it. When pause here for a second. When I do the antique papers, they have writing and stuff on them. You can also print papers on your computer, designs on your computer, and run those through, as long as it's a pigment ink printer, you can run those through the batch as well, and the inks hold up, so you can do multiple layered effects. This is, I belong to the 52 project at the RAM, and this was my exhibit from right before COVID started, so last February. And those are all plant prints that I did.
So those of you who are not local, the RAM is the Riverside Art Museum. So this is a little exhibit at our art museum. And of course, they make great gifts too.
If these were Christmas presents a year ago. So you can make them, mat them, frame them, and great Christmas presents. No, that wasn't Astrid, whether it was somebody else.
I already used mine. I made as birthday cards for my aunt that I sent out last weekend, so it was perfect.
You can mount them on cards and use, like two-sided tape. Mount them on a black or a white card, and they make really effective cards.
That's a great idea.
So yeah, there is a ton of possibilities, and hopefully we did a fairly good job of explaining how to do it. Does anybody have any questions?
Sherry had a question a few minutes ago about how many layers to stack, and I let her know that I stacked 7 in that video because I was working off the Big Brothers Big Sisters kit. Did we answer your question, Sherry, fully enough?
Well, my mom does a lot more than that in a stack.
When you do the flat batches, you can go up, you can do 40 sheets in a batch. You can do a lot, and they still compress. I still use the number 33 rubber bands on all my sizes. Another thing that I do that you probably noticed in a lot of my prints is the geometric designs in the background. What I do is I'll layer paper and then leaves, and then I'll layer a stencil, and then more leaves and another paper. And so the stencil creates those geometric designs that you see in there.
I can answer this one. How long is too long for soaking leaves? I have had days where I had good intentions and put leaves out to soak and then got distracted by shiny things. And it became 24 hours and I did a batch and the colors were super light. So I think I wouldn't want to soak them for more than a few hours. I mean, we've done them overnight, Mom. That's not...
Not really very often.
Yeah.
I'd say really you only want to soak them when you're going to use them right away. You don't want to soak them. You also don't want to put mordant. I experimented once with putting mordant, the iron vinegar mixture, in with the leaves, and they all turned brown. So
I did that too.
Don't do that.
The other thing
Save the mordant for the boiling bath.
The other thing you shouldn't do is forget that you have prints drying in your oven, and set your oven on preheat, and then don't cook something and turn it off and preheat it again. Your papers won't catch on fire, but they will turn a very interesting shade of brown.
Rebecca, I had a question. When you mentioned ironing them, do you iron them when they're damp? Like or when they're mostly dry? What do you ladies recommend? Mostly dry?
When they're dry. Yeah.
All the way dry. Got it.
When they're wet, if you iron them, they'll contort and do all sorts of weird things. They'll shrink it different. So you want them to be completely dry when you iron them. Okay. And you want to keep the iron moving until and then flip them and iron, and then flip them and iron, and then we both put them under something heavy while they're still warm.
Gotcha. Thank you.
But if you're going to stack books on top of them to flatten them, I recommend you have at least a couple of sheets that are slightly damp. That moisture will bleed through the rest of the stack, and they will they'll flatten a little bit easier under a stack of books. Well, I
was gonna say, any other questions?
Well, thank you all so much for joining us. As Rachel said
Oh, one more.
Christine, I have sealed. You can buy some sealants and use sealants on them, and it brightens them up a little bit. I don't do it a lot, but I have tried it, and it's very effective.
Yeah, I've used a sealant on some of the pencils, which of course isn't a wet medium, but it does give them a nice shine. And I haven't had any trouble with the pencils rubbing off at all, but it's certainly worth doing.
I think the dyes and the tannins have permeated the paper, and so if you go and you paint watercolor or paint on top of a plant print, I don't think it will hurt the plant print at all. They're pretty sturdy. And then there was a question. Oh, I wanted to say something about storing, about leaves where you live in cold areas. I hope Astrid's still here, because wasn't Astrid from Colorado?
Yeah.
We only have like 1 month a year where we don't have any leaves, but we're in California. If you're in another state, you're going to have more months where there are no leaves. All the trees are bare. And what you can do is, while the leaves are still falling, the other thing we didn't say is that the most mordant is in the leaves in the fall. So if you collect leaves that you really like, I press them in the pages of a standard composition book. I would collect a bunch, and then I'd open it up and put a few in, and then flip a couple pages and put some more in, and flip more, and filled up a bunch of books. And I did plant prints with those during the months where there were no leaves, and they worked just as well as fresh leaves. So so if you're in a cold area, you might want to store the leaves. I think some people freeze them, but I don't know how that works because I've never done that.
And you can collect leaves and store them in your crisper for several weeks.
Oh, they last a long time. You're welcome, Astrid.
So if anybody else has any questions that come to mind, or you decide that you're going to give this a try, you can email me. I can send you the directions that we gave to the Big Brothers Big Sisters crew. And I know this was a lot to hold in your head. And so feel free to reach out, and be sure to check out the rest of the things that Rivers and Lands Conservancy does. And thank you so much for joining us. Have a great night. Oh, can you put
Yep.
again?
There you go.
That's my daughter, so if you want to get a hold of me, she has my email.
So, all right, ladies, well, I'm going to log us off. Thank you to you few stragglers who are still here. I hope you got everything.
Yes, thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for pulling this together, and to Shelley for your time and being such a wonderful guest speaker. We really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Good night.